Record. Hi guys, thank you for your patience. We are going to get started about now. So this is a lot less attendees than we had registered. So I think there might be some technical difficulties going on with the Zoom link, but we're just going to get started with the icebreaker and some introductions as we wait for more people to join. So if you guys are comfortable turning on your camera, that would be awesome, just so we can really get to know each other and just have you guys get the most out of the fellowship. But if not, that's completely fine. So we are going to start with a quick icebreaker, but while I set that up, would you guys mind putting in the chat where you're from, what grade you are, and what your hobbies are? Let's go with that. So grade, where you're from, hobbies, and whatever other information you'd like to share about yourself. And we also are going to use a pair deck for our icebreaker. So I just put the join code in there. So you do need a Google account to join, but let me know if you don't have a Google account or run into difficulties and we'll figure something out. So this is a pair deck that we're going to use as a quick icebreaker and also just to gauge your guys' backgrounds with artificial intelligence. And no worries if this is your first time being exposed to AI. So the code is in the chat already. It's UV pod, and then you can just Google join pair deck and then input that code and you should be in. But let me know if you run into any difficulties. All right, we're just missing 2 people, but again, let me know if you run into any difficulties. Yeah, Ria, to answer your question, there is a code to join. It should be in the chat earlier, but I'll send it again right now. It's UB pod. All right, just waiting on one person, and let me know if you have any troubles logging in. All right, so we're just going to get started. So just as a preface, as you guys already know, of course, this fellowship is just about artificial intelligence ethics, and we are giving it from Girls for Algorithmic Justice. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview about what GFAJ is and what we do. So GFAJ is an organization that I started in November 2022. So it was originally called She Codes Cures. So it was originally oriented towards uniting female students to advocate for like the intersection of technology and medicine. So my reason for doing that was that my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So I wanted to start an organization really focused on mobilizing the intersection of medicine and technology. She's fine now, thankfully. But so as we started to grow, we decided to pivot over to AI ethics. So we are becoming very defining of that field. So we are the first student organization focused entirely on artificial intelligence ethics and focused entirely and led by female students. So, which I think is amazing that we are at the forefront of this field. So at GFAJ, we offer a bunch of different departments. So these departments work in, for example, AI initiatives, which is a department that is focused on giving this fellowship. They prepare all the content and everything. And then we also have an advocacy department that focuses on lobbying federal lawmakers as well as state lawmakers for different artificial intelligence regulations. Beyond that, we have a department focused on research. They put out different articles and toolkits to educate students about the different aspects of AI, artificial intelligence ethics. And we also have a department focused on social media. So that's an overview about what we do. So in terms of next steps for this organization, I just plan to grow this just have a lot of growth in these coming months and just establish ourselves as a defining organization in the field of artificial intelligence ethics. But thank you guys for joining this call for our fellowship, where we'll just be teaching you guys about AI ethics, how AI works, and how to become an advocate for ethical AI in your community. So I'm just going to kick off the icebreaker. So our first question is just to get a feeler for how familiar you guys are with AI. And just as a disclaimer, this description is a little old. So it says we are the first nonprofit organization focused on AI ethics, completely run by girls of color. So that was something that we were initially focused on, but we've branched out to include all female students regardless of race. So our first question is just to get a feeler of how familiar you are with AI. So you should have an option, I think it's at the bottom right of your corner, to switch between like slide view and answer view. And then you should see a poll that enables you to answer this. Okay, I think something might have gone wrong with that poll. So if you guys don't see it, you can just answer in the chat whether you identify with A, B, or C. Okay, cool. So yeah, since we're around the B/A area, so that is definitely a good place to be because no pun intended, but like a good place to be because there is room for us to grow in our artificial intelligence knowledge. But it sounds like you guys have some of the basics grasped, which will help us teach you more advanced concepts. So we just want, sorry, I just wanted to do a quick icebreaker. So there should be an option to switch to a drawing mode. So I want you guys to draw 3 things that represent you. So it's kind of corny, but like just any 3 things that you think identify with who you are, and then we'll just explain that really quickly. And it can be cryptic or it can be as clear as you want. And let me know if you have any trouble accessing the drawing mode. And then let's take until like 3:25 to do that. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to just switch over to responses. But so I don't believe I can see who submitted which, but so I'm just gonna go slide by slide and, oh, okay, never mind, I see names. But if you made the slide, if you're comfortable, if you could unmute and just tell us about why these objects are significant to you. Yeah, so whoever made the slide, would you mind going?
So my name is Erin. I drew a pencil, a book, and water because, well, for pencil, it's kind of half and half, but it's kind of strange. But I really like doing notes, and I also really love to draw, so I added a pencil. And then I added a book because I'm a visual learner, and I really love to read. And finally, I added water because this year I started swimming and diving at my high school, and I just found it really fun and I thought it would represent me.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. For the next slide, Audrey, would you mind going?
Yeah, so the first one is a pencil because I like writing. Um, and the second one is, or was supposed to be a scale, I guess. But I'm really interested in law and equality, and that's also why I did I'm not sure what that's called actually, but like a female symbol.
Gotcha. That's perfect. Yeah, I know that symbol. I don't know what it's called either, but yeah. Um, okay, Jenna, would you mind going?
Yes, so I drew a cat because I'm a huge animal lover. I love animals, and I've always wanted a cat, but it never worked out. I also drew a book because I love to read mystery novels, and I'm an editor for many like student-led, youth-led organizations. And I also drew a flower because I love to garden in my free time. Thank you.
For sure. Thanks for sharing. So next we have, I'm not sure who drew this, but if you drew it, would
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about my name. I'm Julia, and I drew my dog Benji because I love him a lot and I love animals. I drew a fencing sword because I'm a fencer, and that's something that I really love to do. And I also drew a violin because I'm a violinist and I love playing violin in my free time.
really cool. Thanks for sharing. Next, Nora. Nora, are you able to share this time? It's fine if you can't. No worries. I'm not sure if you're talking, but I personally wasn't able to hear anything, so it might be something up with my computer or yours. Prisha, would you mind going?
Hi everyone. So I drew a book because I love reading outside of school. Then I drew a judicial scale because I want to be a lawyer when I grow up, and I'm involved in like a lot of debate clubs at my school. And then I tried to draw the Deca diamond. I'm not sure how it turned out, but I'm also involved in Deca, and I look forward to exploring more of the field of business.
That's a perfect deck of diamond, top tier. Oh, thanks for sharing, Prisha. Rio, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Ria, and what I drew was a computer since I'm just interested in anything technology related. I'm involved in this in film program at my school, and so I like anything technology and AI. I drew a bicycle because I also just love to be active and go to the gym and do anything with sports related. And I also drew a book just because of sharing of knowledge, like to represent that because I just love learning new things. And typically I like to just learn new things through like podcasts. I'm not a huge reader, but that just is my representation.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Nora, I just saw your message to come back to you. Are you able to, do you think your microphone is working now? If not, we can do a little
Is
later.
this working?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so sorry. The drawing at the bottom left corner is people because I really value my friends and I value community. And the drawing in the middle is a flask because I have a lot of interest towards the science field and like biology. And then that's my, on the right bottom right corner, that's my attempt on drawing a book because I love reading in my free time. And then the drawing above that is a weight because I do love going to the gym. And yeah.
Very cool. Thank you all for sharing. So, okay, so that's it for the slideshow. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. And then I'm just going to give you guys a brief overview of what to expect from today. So today we're mostly focused on giving you guys the groundwork for what artificial intelligence is, and then just the very basic elements of AI ethics. So first, Heridia is going to give a presentation on the basic mechanisms of artificial intelligence ethics, and then I will give a short presentation on the workings of AI, getting very technical, but not like insanely technical. And then I'll also talk about different advocacy steps and different bills that we're prioritizing. Okay, so Heridia, whenever you're ready to start, feel free.
Yeah. Let me just share my screen.
If it doesn't let, okay, I give you permission to share. We should be good.
Do you guys see that?
Yeah, you're good. And then just as a side note, this presentation was made by Ananya, but she wasn't able to be at the meeting today, so Heridia volunteered to step up to present it. So big thank you to her.
Hi, my name is Heridia, and today I'll be presenting this presentation on artificial intelligence ethics and algorithmic discrimination. As said before, this presentation was initially done by Elenia, but unfortunately she's not able to attend today's meeting. So what is artificial intelligence? I know like a lot of you already know somewhat about what artificial intelligence is, but this is just, just in case you don't. Artificial intelligence is the engineering and science of building smart machines which are capable of performing tasks that normally require human intelligence. Usually, artificial intelligence is created for the human benefit itself, which could be seen like in the examples below, which are speech and facial recognition, which makes it easier in task workforces, and ChatGPT, where it makes it easier to get the answers that you need in everyday life. Along with that, there's websites like Google's Bard and computer chess. Like I said before, artificial intelligence is created for the human benefit, but that in itself can be split into 3 categories. Category 1 is intentionality. AI algorithms are designed in a manner to make decisions, most of the time using real-time data. These machines use sensors, digital data, or remote inputs in which they analyze the data and act accordingly. A really good example of this is financial AI machines, which can spot minute changes in stock values because they're using the data in real time that is constantly being updated, and it makes fast decisions based on that. Next, we have intelligence. Artificial intelligence works with machine learning in order to enable intelligent decision making. AI machines can learn about trends by studying data, which then can be used as a solution for a problem by software engineers. An example of this is using AI systems in school enrollments, which can help assign students to schools that fit their needs, say travel distance or clubs. Then finally, we have adaptability. AI systems have the ability to adapt to its environments while compiling data and making decisions. AI must be able to adapt and integrate the different changes in its environments and toward their decision-making process. An example of this is new autonomous vehicles utilizing communications technology to alert other cars about accidents, potholes, and more. This can truly change the safety of the world because it prevents a lot of accidents from happening. So what is AI ethics in the first place? This is what we're going to be talking about throughout the entire presentation. So ethics by itself, not AI ethics, is the principles of conduct governing an individual or a group. AI ethics is a set of moral ideas that advise the design and outcomes of artificial intelligence. Human beings are embedded with cognitive biases, and those biases are exhibited in our data. Since data is a key point in machine learning algorithms, it is important that AI has the ability to look for human biases and eliminate them. We'll go more into AI biases later on in this presentation. So before we do that, we have the 4 areas of AI ethics. First, we have AI bias, like I mentioned earlier, and avoiding it. AI learns and makes decisions from compiling and analyzing data. Defective AI machines demonstrate bias because of poor representation and diversity in the data pieces. And this can lead to harm towards different types of minority groups and underrepresented groups. This will explain more later on. Next, we have AI and privacy. AI gathers information in order to learn. Most of the information given to machines comes from the users themselves. However, many of the time, users aren't aware that their information is being gathered for these machines and violating their privacy and security, which can since most people aren't aware that these machines are taking their information, they're more likely to give privy information, such as your birth date or like credit card numbers, etc., which can, because it's going into these machines, can violate their privacy and security. Next, we have AI mistakes and trying to avoid them. Poorly made AI can cause mistakes that can lead to grave disasters, ranging from a loss in revenue to, in only extreme cases, death. Proper amounts of testing need to go into AI machines to make sure it doesn't pose as a threat to humans. This is where a lot of people get the idea of the AI apocalypse, where they think AI is going to take over the world. However, with avoiding AI mistakes like this, we can ensure that that won't happen, even though it's like a far off fantasy. And finally, we have AI environmental impact. AI machines are becoming larger and more complex by the day. These newer models consume a significant amount of energy, and researchers and developers are looking for ways to efficiently teach and charge AI machines. This is so the environment is not as impacted and we're remaining green while focusing on the future. So now we have the 5 pillars of AI ethics. Our first pillar is accountability. One of the most important aspects of AI is its accountability. Being able to rely on artificial intelligence for faster data analysis only happens when the software is dependable and trustworthy. This ties into pillar 2, which is reliability. AI is constantly using new sources for data for its further analysis. In order for AI to be used properly in the real world, the reliability of it becomes a key issue. To combat this issue, many businesses are using the standardization of processes to ensure the AI's reliability. This is why people use AI in the first place, to make sure that it's reliable and they get the answers that they need. Say you have a working AI machine that helps you with your daily tasks. For example, there's a AI robot that knows how to make pancakes. However, it's being reliable in the sense that it can make pancakes. But if it can't, we can't really trust the AI, can we? That's why it's one of the 2 pillars. Next, we have explainability. The importance of explanation and description of AI models is so all departments and organizations can understand its functions. AI can only benefit an enterprise if all sectors are able to translate the findings in the data. There's nothing more to add on to that except for Next, we have security. Technological security is very crucial, especially due to the growing concern of ransomware attacks. Companies need to have the ability to protect AI models from being attacked due to its many risks. If you aren't aware, ransomware attacks are attacks on your computer's data, and attacks on AI can pose a greater threat because it stores much more data, not only about yourself, but about many other people. This pillar also ties into our final pillar, which is privacy. Many artificial intelligence models are open to the vast majority of the public. Because of this, businesses and companies must ensure the protection of customer data, especially in the healthcare and banking areas. This is because healthcare and banking have some of the most privy information to you, like your social security numbers, credit card numbers, your insurance, and more. And now we move on to racial and gender discrimination in AI. This can fall under AI bias. However, how does bias appear in AI in the first place? Bias has been embedded in AI machines from the beginning of its making. The data used to train AI models and machines is often discriminating and underrepresenting of people of color, women, and various other minority groups. This data is then developed and used by AI machines, furthering the damage of racial and gender bias in technology. This same technology goes on to be used for the entire world, even these minority groups, which can cause a lot of harm, as they'll see later on. The tech industry itself lacks proper representation of all people, minimizing the understanding of the potential harms of bias within AI. Now we have a couple of examples of AI bias in the real world. First, we have AI machines in the housing market, which has been growing recently because of the increased use of AI in general. AI systems evaluate potential tenants by relying on court records and other bias-filled data sets. Many of the time, people were denied housing, even if they could pay rent for it, solely because of their race. The AI algorithms also use criminal histories and evictions as data. These types of data subsets have a heavy influence of racial disparities, especially because racism is present in a lot of judges as well as a lot of landlords, which can heavily influence the data presented in criminal histories and evictions. Next, we have AI in the working field. In the working field, employers have begun to use AI tools in the interviewing and job screening processes. This poses as a gigantic risk for minorities, like people with disabilities and other small groups. Rather than AI making technology more diversity friendly, it instead made it worse for marginalized groups. Next, we have racial bias in AI instead of just bias in general. This is a more niche and specific because it is a lot more present today in AI. Many AI systems struggle to detect humans with darker skin tones and complexions. Within the American healthcare system, there is racial bias when predicting the needs and risk levels of patients. Black people and other minorities are constantly classified as less risky patients compared to white patients by AI algorithms. This is what we mentioned earlier with the AI mistakes part, where it could potentially lead to death because of the way AI is discriminating, or the data that AI is given is discriminating against minority groups. Next, we have facial recognition. This is what you would think about when you think of those spy movies, or when you go to the airport and see the facial, when you can scan your face and it immediately identifies you. It's one of the most used AI systems today, like I stated earlier, in airport passenger screening, law enforcement surveillance, and phone security. Police use facial recognition software to compare suspects to mugshots and driver's licenses and more. The implementation of this software significantly pushes for racial bias, especially against African Americans. Continuing on from that, in the law enforcement, facial recognition data is compiled camera footage mugshots, which are previous information in the police database. Since these data subsets come from human evaluation, AI software is bound to have a racial bias. This is especially if said police forces are racist and discriminate. In the US, African Americans and Asians are much more likely to be misidentified for a crime than white people are. This software cannot properly identify people of darker skin tones, especially when it comes to women, leading to the police to arrest the wrong people. Also continuing on from that, with the growing usage of facial recognition software, there is a growing risk towards our freedom of expression, which is a law granted by the Declaration of Independence. Law enforcement agencies have begun using this AI technology to monitor and track Black and other people of color protesters, even though it has been proven that it shows racial bias. The racial bias is growing. The systematic racism that is experienced by minorities on a daily basis is just because of this poorly trained software. In addition to racial bias, there is also a gender bias aspect to bias in AI. And this is one of the biggest aspects because a lot of the time, technology has been defined as a man's job and area of work. With the growth of AI tools, women have been pushed to the sidelines once again. The idea of feminizing AI tools, as seen in Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri, was first created to diversify technology. However, it has only led to portraying women and girls to have submissive personalities and stereotypical female traits, which are helpful, accommodating, and more. This is because of the manner that Amazon's Alexa and Apple's Siri are used. They're purely used to ask for help and assistance. Consumers have also favored having a robotic male voice when being taught or instructed to do something. And male AI robots are often used in the security-related task force, while female AI robots are designed to help and care for people. AI machines learn and adapt through the dataset that is given to them. Since there are less women contributing in the AI field, there are many gaps in the machine's knowledge. This is where gender bias in AI continues to grow into a bigger issue. This can also lead to the enforcement of gender roles in society and continuing gender problems. So how are we as a community, as a group, and as a world going to try and fix this gender bias and bias in AI in general? So as we talked about before, gender bias is a really big issue. In most scenarios, AI is created by men, leading to the lack of female ideals and ideas within the machine. The biggest solution for this is to encourage more women to join the STEM fields, specifically in the design of artificial intelligence. In order for this solution to work, women need to feel safer in their workplace. It is recorded that most women are sexually harassed in the office, which is going to make it much harder for women to feel safer. We also have a problem with diversity, as talked about with the facial recognition software, as well as the earlier examples with with bias in AI. AI machines tend to work best for the white male customers due to the small variety in datasets. In order to make AI more diversity friendly, the data subsets that machines should have more diverse information, such as gender, ethnicity, age, sexuality, as well as people with disabilities. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I know it was pretty lengthy, but I hope you learned a little bit more about AI. These are the sources. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Heridia. And thank you again for stepping up to take the presentation, as I know it was pretty last minute that I asked you to do it. But awesome job. So next we're going to talk about AI advocacy and legislation. So I know that I mentioned I would talk about the mechanisms of deep learning, machine learning, and just artificial intelligence as a whole before we got into this, but on second thought, I think it would be better to just talk through the more broad principles of AI advocacy, and then we'll either go into like the mechanisms of how AI works, either today or at tomorrow's fellowship session. So yeah, I'm just going to share my screen now, and then feel free to share any thoughts, any things you took away from Heridia's presentation in the chat while I set that up. I'm just going to give you guys like 2-3 minutes to share any thoughts if you want in the chat, just takeaways from Heridia's presentation. Awesome. And then if you guys have any feedback that you want to drop in the chat, feel free to do that anytime. But thank you again, Heridia. Okay, so we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and legislation. So this presentation was actually made by Ira, but she wasn't able to be here, so I'm just presenting it for her. So we have like a kind of musical chairs going on with the presentations. So yeah, it's often like different people made it, then different people are presenting it, but we had to shuffle around some things. But I'll be presenting Ira's presentation on artificial intelligence advocacy and legislation. So this will just break down how to become an advocate for AI ethics in your community, and how to really amplify your voice on this very important issue and to spur change in your community at both the local, state, and national level. So I'll talk through the basics of AI advocacy, some talking points you can bring up when speaking to legislators, and some specific legislation that we're prioritizing at GFAJ and that you could draw inspiration from. And then towards the end, we'll do a quick just practice on how you would develop an elevator pitch that you could present to elected officials. Okay, so in terms of content, so we'll go through what is advocacy, the different types and different routes that you could pursue when advocating for artificial intelligence ethics, some recommended do's and don'ts to really amplify your impact and make the biggest possible impact, and some current AI legislation that we're prioritizing, and then just a summary of just everything that you can do to advocate for this super important issue. So before I dive into the section on what is advocacy, I wanted to talk more about the issue of artificial intelligence ethics. So Heridia did an amazing job walking through just what that issue is and why it's important, and I just wanted to add on to the presentation that she gave. So artificial intelligence ethics is, just like Heridia said, it's just a principle of advocating for ethics in artificial intelligence. So that just means artificial intelligence that is catered towards human interests and that follows the moral principles and moral codes that we humans have set for ourselves. So in terms of AI ethics, one big factor of that is making AI that is non-discriminatory. So one of the biggest issues with artificial intelligence right now is that it tends to have an implicit bias towards certain groups. So these groups can include women of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, disabled individuals, and so on. So these implicit biases are the result of long-standing prejudices. And in terms of mechanisms, this is often because of either biased data sets or very limited data sets. So I'll just go off on a tangent, but as I'm sure you guys know, artificial intelligence is just essentially a network that runs certain input data against the mechanisms it has inside it and then spits out some sort of output data. And then as it is trained, it learns that this is a good output, this is a bad output, and then it becomes more and more sophisticated. So part of the problem that spurs racial bias or sexual bias or any other kind of bias in artificial intelligence is because of flaws within the data sets. So for example, one very pressing example is the ability, or I should say the inability, of different facial recognition technologies to identify people of color. So facial recognition technologies are wildly inaccurate when they try to identify people of color. It is a little bit better for Caucasian people, but it still has a long way to go before it can accurately and definitely identify any person, much less people of color who artificial intelligence facial recognition systems have long struggled with identifying. So the reason for this is first and foremost a lack of diverse data sets. So these data sets that are used to train facial recognition technology is essentially just a database of different face prints that they are trained on. So these face prints are more often than not Caucasian and usually male as well. So because of this, there's not a ton of representation for women, much less women of color, in these face print data sets. So because of that, when you input a picture of a woman of color into a facial recognition algorithm, then it struggles to identify who this person is, as it struggles to compare it against the pre-existing information it has. And then beyond that, a huge part of this is also just human error. So, or not human error, but human bias when developing these models. So these models are more often than not developed by people who are Caucasian and people who are male. And there's not a lot of representation for women in the AI workforce right now. So one statistic is that about 11% of AI researchers and developers are female, which is crazy. There's still a long way we have to go to getting to that gender equality. And a side effect of that disproportionate number of female and number of male people working on these AI systems results in this implicit bias. And just like Heredia said, there's this bias that like female robots or female artificial intelligence systems are the ones that are helpful, while the security ones are the ones that have the male voice, and just little biases like that. And then also the more drastic biases in terms of how they are built and how they are able to cater to the needs of different groups of people. So yeah, that's just my brief overview of why this issue is important. And I think a common misconception with artificial intelligence ethics is that this is kind of an issue that is not as important as other world issues like climate change or reproductive justice. But I would argue that it is very much as important. So it's not just an issue that is just being stirred up just because, but as artificial intelligence comes to take more and more of a role in our lives, there is going to be artificial intelligence everywhere. So I personally believe that no aspect of what we do will be untouched by artificial intelligence. It can be used to automate nearly everything. So because of that, it is so important that these AI systems protect their users' privacy rights and also ensure no discrimination in order to make a future of technology that serves everyone, not just a privileged few. So that is why the issue of artificial intelligence ethics is super important. And then I'm now going to dive into how you can become an advocate for AI ethics in your community. So as a definition, the definition of advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. So in the context of AI ethics, that is essentially just one, amplifying your voice on why this issue is important to you, and then two, spurring action in your community, as well as the, you can go even further than the community, you can advocate at the state level and or the national level, and potentially the international level. So in terms of the different types of advocacy, so one of the most common forms of advocacy is lobbying. So I'm just going to stop for like an interactive section, but like, have you guys heard of lobbying before? And if so, what experience do you have with it? And then you can either unmute or you can put it in the chat. All right, yeah, so again, if you have any experience with lobbying, feel free to unmute, or if you have any knowledge of what that is, also feel free to unmute. But I'll just talk about my experience personally. So lobbying, I have done lobbying for the American Cancer Society and of course for GFAJ. So for the American Cancer Society, it's very much focused on advocating for cancer patient protections as well as palliative care acts. And then for GFAJ, we're more focused on artificial intelligence ethics, obviously. And then we're also very focused on facial recognition technology. So I've lobbied at the local, state, and national level. So I have yet to lobby at the international level. I'm not sure what that would look like, but like speaking to the UN, but I have lobbied at the local, state, and national level, just speaking to different legislators and lawmakers about why these issues are important to me and what bills should be passed regarding it. Did anyone want to share? No worries if not.
I can share a little bit.
Yes, go for it.
So I work for an organization called AI EDU, and basically in this organization, we speak to township officials, whether it be at the regional level at your school, or state officials, or even national officials, to basically lobby for AI education in schools. A lot of schools nowadays have taken the stance of just banning the use of AI, especially when it comes to school assignments. And unfortunately, with both administrators and students, no one truly understands the idea of AI. So the purpose of this organization is to help people understand what are the negative problems associated with AI, as well as how it can help. Because as you know, there are a lot of like studying tools out there that are based on AI. So it's basically just an organization to speak to administrators about asking to teach about AI in schools.
That's amazing. That's a really important cause, and kudos to you for taking action on that. Did anyone else want to share in terms of lobbying experience? If not, I'll just dive back in. But thank you again, Prisha, for sharing. Okay, all good. So yeah, in terms of lobbying, so that is just the act of attempting to persuade any private, a private individual or private group trying to persuade the actions of the government. So in terms of the context of AI ethics, we, at least at GFAJ, we pursue a lot of different advocacy routes. So we have been mostly focused on just the traditional route of just meeting with legislators, but we are also going to delve into more the avenues of phone banking, email banking, and text banking, just to really amplify our voices on the different issues that we're advocating for. So lobbying is essentially at its core, it's just meeting with a government official or having some sort of action that influences a government official to take a certain action that you want them to take. So like I said before, the most traditional route is to schedule a meeting with your legislator. So that is traditionally done with a lawmaker that directly represents you, such as your mayor, your district senator, your overall state senator, your House of Representatives member, and so on. And just someone who you are a direct constituent to is the most traditional route to lobby. So that lobbying usually means contacting them and then setting up a meeting and then talking with them to discuss why this issue is important to you and what relevant legislation you want to see passed and what this lawmaker can do about it. And another avenue that is becoming more popular is phone banking. So that's just the principle of calling different voters and potentially calling the offices of lawmakers, just repeatedly calling them to just talk to them about why this issue is important to you. So that is perhaps a little more easy than scheduling a formal meeting, but is definitely an impactful way to lobby. And even though it's not really in the traditional sense of what we think of as lobbying. And then another method, it says here, writing letters. So that's definitely an option. It's used much less these days, just because everything's digital now, but you do definitely have the option of writing a pen and paper letter and then sending that over to your lawmaker's house or office, not house. So letter writing, the more common format is email writing. So legislators usually have like a spot on their website where you can just drop them a message, and that's a good way to do like the digital version of writing a letter. And then another method is text banking. So I'm sure you guys have received like, well, maybe you haven't, but you most likely have those texts like, join this organization or this event is today, get out the vote kind of thing. So text banking is just the idea of texting a broad group of people just to spread awareness around these issues and to encourage them to attend some sort of event or some sort of advocacy initiative just surrounding these issues. So in terms of public education, we can consider an indirect form of lobbying. So the principle of not directly meeting with that legislator, not directly contacting them, but instead working in a very localized level to spread awareness in the community and to educate people about this issue in order for them to also become advocates for this issue. So this helps amplify a cause tenfold because you are spreading that knowledge and it becomes a cause that people are passionate about. So in a way, this AI ethics fellowship is falling into the public education kind of aspect of lobbying because we are trying to spread knowledge about this issue and to teach you guys how to become advocates for this issue. And just that really amplifies the impact of this issue and amplifies the voices that are calling for change on this issue in order to make it something that is not just centralized to one person, to become something that a whole community cares about. So in terms of what that public education could look like, so at GFAJ, we try to focus on very direct education. So for example, meeting with an elementary school, meeting with a middle school to talk to them about artificial intelligence and give a presentation on what AI is and how it works, and then also delving into the ethics side of AI. So just as very small, very localized actions, like just giving a workshop to your local library, giving a workshop to your local elementary school, even though they may seem small when you do it, those really do build up. And the more and more people know about this issue, the more and more impact change will have. All right, so plug. So this is just a picture of a lobbying session that we just did. It was featured on our Instagram. Not all of our lobbying sessions are, but this is a lobbying session we did with Senator Rosemary Bayer. So Senator Rosemary Bayer, I believe she represents District 11 of Michigan. So she is a state senator. So meaning that she participates in the Michigan state legislature, not the federal legislature, but she is nonetheless a very influential person and someone that we were really honored to speak to. So at our meeting with Senator Bayer and her assistant, we just talked about facial recognition and why this issue is important to us and what actions we wanted to see. And we ultimately did get Senator Bayer to agree to sponsor the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act, which is really exciting that we have her support on that. Oh, thank you, Audrey. So yeah, that was a really fun meeting and just a very good embodiment of something that we're trying to do with GFAJ in terms of advocacy. So there are definitely a lot more legislative sessions to come with GFAJ. It's a little messy now as we start to get started because we weren't really focused so much on political action before, but it will definitely get smoother, and I foresee a lot more meetings with legislators, which is really exciting. So in terms of advocacy steps, I would say if you want to follow that traditional route of lobbying a legislator, I would say that your first step would be to identify which bills and which cause you want to prioritize. So even if you decide that you want to talk about AI ethics at your meeting, there is a lot of different facets you can explore within that. So for example, you could talk just about facial recognition technology, which is what we did when we met with Senator Bayer, or you could talk about a specific bill, which we also chose to do, the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act, which is a mouthful. But so you really want to narrow down on either which specific bill you're talking to them about, or which specific aspect of the cause. You do always have the option of just talking about a specific cause overall. So for example, if you just wanted to talk about AI ethics as a whole, that is completely fine, but you should be prepared with specific examples and specific action items that the lawmakers can take. So you're just building this that first step. You really want to know beforehand what your goal of this meeting is, because the best way to kind of sabotage a meeting is not knowing why you're doing it, because then you're left fumbling as a lawmaker speaks to you and you don't really have a clear purpose. But so the first step is to really hammer out what you want to achieve with this lobbying session. So for example, when we met with Senator Bayer, our clear purpose was, okay, we want her to endorse the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act. And then our steps for that are, we'll talk about why it's important, how we relate to it, and the different effects it'll have. So just having that very hammered out purpose is crucial to having a successful lobbying session. And then the next step is to identify which lawmakers you want to contact. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a lawmaker that represents you. So just going back to the Senator Bayer example, she definitely does not represent me because I'm in New Jersey and she's a Michigan state senator, but still nonetheless a lawmaker that is really important that I wanted to contact and talk to her. So the reason why I contacted her instead, or well, not to claim credit, Tess actually contacted her. I was just kind of on the meeting, but the reason why Tess contacted her was because Tess is a direct constituent of Senator Bayer. So you ideally want to choose lawmakers that directly represent you. So that could be your mayor, your district senator, your state senator, you have the idea. But you ideally want someone that you are constituent for, and just think about it like you could vote for that person. That's what qualifies as a constituent. And those people would potentially be the most keen and invested in what you have to say, but you are definitely not limited to just those people. You are, of course, more than welcome to contact legislators who don't necessarily represent you. And the next step is to send an email. It doesn't say it here, but you could also just call the office to try to set up a meeting. And these are usually the most effective ways to set up a meeting rather than just any other communication avenue. So yeah, send the email or make a call. And it's usually quite easy to find the office of the lawmaker's contact information on their website, and then just correspond set up that call and identify whether that call will be in person or virtual. And then prepare your talking points and make sure you know the bill inside and out. So these advocacy steps were set up if you were following a bill. The steps will nonetheless be the same if you were just focusing on just a broader cause, but make sure you know the bill or the cause or both of them if that's what you're talking about inside and out. You should be able and ready to provide specific information and very concrete examples in order to maximize the impact of your session. And then another step is to send a follow-up after the meeting. Just, hi, thank you so much for your time, blah, 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 everything we went over. And then just a reminder of the next steps that you want the congressperson to take. Or maybe it's not a congressperson, a local legislator to take. And before I go into the next slide, I'm just going to pause here. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts on what I went over already? And then feel free to unmute or put in the chat. Okay, all good, but feel free to drop any feedback or thoughts or takeaways in the chat at any time. So some specific lobbying pointers to really maximize the impact of your session is to, one, be very, very explicit about the actions that you want the official to take. So you want to be very concrete about what you want them to do after the session, because again, the quickest way to sabotage a lobbying session is to not be super specific about what you want the lawmaker to actually do. So be very specific, like, I want you to endorse this cause, or I want you to support this bill, or I want you to vote in favor of this bill, that kind of thing. So just be very explicit and talk during the meeting about what the lawmaker can do and why you want them to do it. And then another pointer is to bring a friend or two. So just empirically, I found that lobbying sessions are a lot more effective if you have just another person with you to both share their experience, so you have a diversity of experiences to draw on, but also to make it a lot more of a, just more people just encourages the lawmaker to pay a lot more attention to you. So the more people that you have backing this cause up, and obviously you don't want to overwhelm the congressperson and have like 30 people on the call, but if you do have a few people on the call, that shows that this is an issue that a lot of people relate to, and that will really help pressure the lawmaker to take action. And then, like I mentioned before, the most effective way is to prioritize lawmakers that you are a direct constituent for. So for example, if I'm just doing a lobbying session on my own, it might not necessarily be the greatest idea to contact like a congressperson from Texas, but it's definitely doable, and they would usually be receptive to meeting you. But I found personally that lawmakers that you are a direct constituent for are a lot more willing to talk to you and listen to you. And then another tip is to cite specific sections of the bill. So if you do decide to lobby specifically for a certain bill, which is the most common lobbying tactic, but so if you are focused on a specific bill, then you really want to break down the bill. So I would highly recommend reading the bill beforehand and to just know it inside and out. You don't have to be an expert on everything talked about surrounding that field, but you should at least know that bill quite well. And then you ideally want to cite specific sections of the bill that are relevant for your discussion with the legislator. And you also want to provide relevant examples. So at our meeting with Senator Bayer, we talked about that recent case where a lady was arrested for carjacking after she was mistakenly identified by a facial recognition system, which she obviously could not have done the carjacking because she was 8 months pregnant at the time of the accusation. So we cited that example that was very recent, and we also cited some specific examples that happened in Michigan cities. So that it brought the issue, like it narrowed in the issue a lot, because another big pitfall is that these issues are so broad and so all-encompassing that sometimes it can be hard for the legislator to see, how does this affect my constituents? Why should I care about it specifically? Obviously they won't say that in so many words, but you really want to show the direct connection to this legislator's constituents and the area they're based in, and just provide very relevant examples to back up your points. And then be prepared to talk about your connections to this bill. So this is not mandatory, but it is always good to talk about why this bill is important to you, because you could talk about why as a young person you care about this issue, and just why this bill has a stake in your future and why you're so invested in it. It really helps to tie the cause to you personally, and it really helps to add like a human face to this issue, so to explain why it's important. And then my tip, as I mentioned before, is to send a follow-up summary, because for lobbying sessions, sometimes it's just like meet with the person and then over, done, never hear from back never hear back from them again. So I would say don't wait for that lawmaker to contact you, because they not always will send a follow-up. They won't always take those actions that you discussed at the meeting. So I will say that it is very important to send a follow-up summary. So it's talking about, hey, I really enjoyed our meeting. Thank you for your time. And then include a summary of everything you went over. And so I usually like to write a document of all the points we went over and then attach that in the email, and then just reiterate those next steps that you wanted the congressperson to take. And that really hammers home and ensures a lot more action than if you just ended the meeting and then never talked to them ever again. All right, so voting is technically another form of advocacy. I think most of the people on this call aren't old enough to vote, but when you are able to vote, voting is a very strategic form of advocacy. So if you identify representatives who support your viewpoints, so in the context of AI ethics, that means legislators who are ready and passionate about advocating for equitable technology, then choosing those lawmakers and voting for them is another way of expressing your viewpoint. So this doesn't have to necessarily be at the presidential level, because I think when we think of voting, we think just presidential election, but there are a lot of other elections that you can partake in. You could partake in your state Senate election, your state House of Representatives election, your mayoral election, Board of Education election, your state Senate, state legislature election. So there's a lot of different smaller elections. So even though those are smaller, they are nonetheless important. And I highly encourage you guys to be very conscious when you're voting, to vote in as many elections as you are able to, and to also really focus on identifying representatives who represent your voice well. All right, so litigation. So this kind of this ties into legislative advocacy. So litigation is just a process of taking legal action. So I think what we think of most often with litigation is suing someone. So this is definitely not the sole recourse for litigation. So litigation could just mean just taking legal action. So this could, for example, be a referendum. So a referendum is just part of a bill or a whole bill that is put up to the decision of the people. So it will pass through, it's usually passing through state legislature, but it could also be done for federal bills, and then just putting it on the ballot for, actually I take that back. I don't think you could do that for federal bills, but I will definitely research that. But yeah, so state, you can definitely do that. So it goes through the legislature, and then a lot of states will just put it on the ballot for the citizens to be the final voice on whether this bill should pass. So referendums are a good way to take legal action. So very policy focused. Litigation could also be woven into just doing a very policy-focused lobbying session and just overall advocating for more laws that support the cause that you're passionate about. All right, so the do's and don'ts of advocacy. So I kind of went over this before in my tips, but definitely do be specific about what you want them to see done, and then be very clear and concise. So don't ramble, well, it's inevitable, everyone does it, but don't try to avoid filler words. Just anything that will distract from the purpose of why you're there and why they should care about this bill or this cause. And be very open to counter arguments. So one thing that, just to go back to Senator Bayer, because there's such a wealth of things we can learn about lobbying just from that session we did. So one thing that, at least me personally, I was unexpected for, was that Senator Bayer brought up a very good point. And she said that she wasn't sure if this bill would necessarily help her state, because so the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act, it is intended to put a pause on the rollout of facial recognition technology at the federal and state level, and then it will cut off funding for any state that continues to use any state that continues to use facial recognition just by public government institutions. So Senator Bayer mentioned that her state does currently use facial recognition technology, and she wasn't sure if they can move fast enough to eliminate that from their practices and avoid being cut off funds. So she brought that up, that she really doesn't want to do anything that would cut off funds from her state. So that was a very good counter argument that we then rebutted with an argument that this is a really important cause, and having that bill would spur action faster than if it slowly just kind of dwindles away, and that you may need that harsh cutting off funds to really put a fix on this cause. And we just had a kind of argument about that, but just be prepared for counter arguments. You don't have to identify every possible counter argument, but you should be prepared for the most obvious flaws in your argument and how you can address them. And counter them calmly. Don't get mad, of course. Just counter very rationally and very calmly. about your thoughts on it and how it kind of rebuts what the person said. And if you don't know something, it is 100% okay to say that you don't know. Well, you shouldn't say like just like I don't know, man, but like you could say that is a really good point. I will look into that and get back to you with a follow-up email or something. So it is completely okay if you don't know, for example, a specific section of the bill. If you don't know a specific aspect of legislation, you can always get back to them about that. And in terms of don'ts, don't over-explain. Yeah, I didn't make this presentation, Ira did, but I'm assuming that by don't over-explain, that means don't go super in depth about the legislation. So, which is a really good point because you don't want to walk through every aspect of the bill because that will just wind up being like a 3-hour long session and no one has time for that. But you should really be very conscious about bringing up the information that is most relevant to your purpose. And that goes back to having a mission for your legislative session. And don't overload the representative with too many topics. So be very mindful of exactly what you want to accomplish with this. So if you're talking about AI ethics, don't also talk about climate change, which is, of course, a highly important cause, but just weaving too many causes into, unless we have a direct nexus, just weaving too many causes just leads to a very convoluted session. And definitely don't be rude when dealing with counter arguments. Respect that these lawmakers might not always be in support of what you have to say, and just respect that they might have different priorities, and just be very calm and collected when you just talk about and just have a friendly argument about why this is important. And don't make promises that you can't act upon. So yeah, don't say that like this bill will cure cancer in your state. Well, you know what I mean? But like don't oversell the bill to the extent that you could get in trouble for saying something false about this bill. And again, don't argue, rather calmly persuade. A little bit of argument is always good, but don't lose your temper, of course. So we're just going to do a bit of practice. So I'm going to have you guys prepare a 3-minute elevator pitch surrounding the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act. So I chose this bill because this one is by far the most straightforward out of all of the bills I'm going to get into. So after we just do this quick practice activity, I'm going to talk very specifically about the bills that you guys can advocate for. But this is by far the most simple to understand and to learn very quickly about what it would do. So I'm just going to have you guys prepare like a 3-minute, it doesn't have to be 3 minutes, it can be about like 1 to 2 minutes, just talking about, just pretending if you were meeting with a lawmaker, how would you sell this act? So just to give an overview, I'm also going to post the congressional summary in the chat in a second, but just to give an overview, this bill would essentially put a pause on the federal and the state rollout of different facial recognition technologies. So it essentially calls for a moratorium. So moratorium is just a fancy word for putting a pause on, just stopping some sort of process. So this bill would prevent the federal government from using facial recognition technology for an indefinite amount of time, until further research has been done to really understand the flaws of facial recognition technology and how they can address different discriminatory aspects. And it would also prevent the states from doing that. It wouldn't just completely cut off the states, but it would cut off funding for if they continue to use facial recognition in their government and in their law enforcement. So that's about it for the bill. It's very straightforward to understand. So I'm just going to have you guys write just on a piece of paper or just in a separate document, just some pointers for what you would say in that pitch. And I'm going to give you guys about 5 to 10 minutes to write that, and then we'll just go around and present that if you're comfortable. And yeah, so I'm just going to give you guys until, let's say, 4:30 to present that, to write that. All right. And I will let you guys know when we get close to the time limit, but let me know if you have any questions. I know this is kind of a very sudden demand to make of you guys, and it definitely doesn't have to be perfect pitch, but just you should include what this bill is and why the legislator should support it and how you personally relate to it. And I will also put the official congressional summary in the chat if you guys want to read through that, but that's definitely not required. You can just go off of the information that I gave you, that it would just essentially put a pause on facial recognition technology. And feel free to do your own research. Again, it doesn't have to be super comprehensive, but I just want to give you guys practice with how you would potentially meet with a legislator and talk to them about this bill. So yeah, let's go for it. And we'll regroup at around 4:30. Right, so you guys can have a few more minutes, but we're just nearing the end of the time, and then afterwards we're just going to regroup. The pitches definitely don't have to be perfect, and we'll just share like where we're at with these pitches. All right, so does anyone want to go first for your pitch? So it should wind up being a few minutes long. It definitely doesn't have to be perfect, just a very rudimentary overview of what you would say to that legislator if you were potentially speaking to them about this facial recognition biometric technology moratorium act. And is anyone interested in going first? Going once, going twice. Okay, all good. If you guys are more comfortable, you can definitely take a few more minutes to type up your summary of your presentation and then put it in the chat. And then we'll just come back to this towards the end of the presentation, as I know this is kind of a very rushed time for you to write an elevator pitch. So I'm just going to talk a bit more about the current legislation, and just as a recap, we'll go back to this. So just feel free to continue working on your pitch in the meantime. And so in terms of current legislation, so one such current legislation is the National AI Initiative Act of 2020. So it was part of the National Defense Authorization Act, and it established a National AI Initiative Department or office. So it's focused on expanding the US's use of artificial intelligence and just making us a leader in AI development. So it means preparing the future American workforce for AI integration and just really pushing federal development of AI. So that's an overview of that. So in terms of just the principles of AI ethics advocacy, so one thing that I talked very heavily about before is discrimination. So a lot of AI systems have built-in bias as a result of the biases of those that create the system. And another concern is privacy. So this I talked about less, but it's just the idea that AI is inherently privacy invaded because it uses so much personal data that it can definitely pose a threat to your personal data integrity and let some very personal information just go into the realm of technology and AI and end up who knows where. So for example, Zoom recently stated that user data would be used to train AI, which sounds innocuous at first, but that could lead to some personal information being used because a lot of companies aren't really transparent about the personal information they're using to train their artificial intelligence. And OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, also ran into some difficulties with that. I'm not sure if you guys know about the FTC launching an investigation into OpenAI, but that was mainly about ChatGPT having some potential abilities that drew on user data that would impede user privacy and just take some very personal data that OpenAI wasn't clearly disclosing that they were taking when users use ChatGPT. And another principle of AI ethics is combating plagiarism. So a lot of AI models use plagiarism. So for example, DALL-E, which is a very popular image generator, it uses publicly available and not publicly available images. So it essentially just crawls through Google Images and uses those images and then rehashes them into the AI generated artwork that you requested. So this often incorporates parts of images that were not public by just like indiscriminately crawling through what's available on Google Images. That leads to a lot of artists' work being just reappropriated into these AI images, which leads to a whole suite of legal questions about image ownership and art ownership. But plagiarism is a very big problem with AI models, because you could say that it's fine to train them on this private works, but it ends up being not fine when these private works, like a piece of an artwork that winds up in an AI generated image, or a piece of a book that an author wrote and then that winds up in an AI generated novel. So there's very much that issue of plagiarism and how we can prevent that in order to protect the rights of authors, artists, and recently came to attention of filmmakers and scriptwriters. So another aspect is identity theft. So you guys have probably heard of like deep fakes, but this is just the idea that AI can be used to create very, very realistic replications of a person, whether it be their voice, their image, a combination of both, but just to create very, very realistic and convincing fakes. So this is getting better and better as AI technology becomes more sophisticated. So for example, there are voice cloning systems that can just take a sample of someone's voice and then expand that to have their vocal inflections read a whole passage and ultimately just fake an entire just conversation that a person did not actually say. And deepfakes usually refer to more of like an image, like usually you see like TikTok, like someone just had their face altered using AI technology to appear to be someone that they're not actually. And deepfakes are definitely a big concern because it really blurs the line between reliable media and unreliable media, because even reliable news sources can accidentally pick up an image that was AI generated. It's not really a huge problem now, but it will definitely become more and more of a problem as this technology becomes more sophisticated, to the point where we can't really tell the difference between an actual image versus an AI generated image or an AI modified image. So some specific bills, this part's a little more dry, a little more, what's the word? I'm blanking, but yeah, a little, esoteric, a little more esoteric. But so this is definitely a little more dry, but I will talk a little bit later on why these bills are relevant. So the Facial Recognition Biometric Technology Moratorium Act is basically, like we talked about before, intended to put a pause or a moratorium on AI facial recognition until further research has been done. And the Social Media Nudge Act, this one is not necessarily tied to artificial intelligence, but does still have implications for AI. So it basically just requires social media platforms to address social media addiction and also to address the content that users are being shown in order to remove any content that is potentially dangerous or would trigger just be inappropriate for the users to see. So this very much focuses on regulating social media companies in terms of the content they can show users and just in terms of the algorithms they use to regulate user use. And then the Algorithmic Accountability Act, this one is focused on certain ethics principles surrounding AI. So this is specifically for augmented critical decisions, which is just any process that is augmented using artificial intelligence, as well as biometrics, which is just facial recognition technology, voice recognition technology that is focused on identifying a person using some sort of sample of their face print or their voice print, that kind of thing. And then the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act, that one I talked about briefly before, but that's about spurring artificial intelligence development, but in a very responsible manner. So it does include setting up a lot more training and a lot more development into artificial intelligence, but it does juxtapose that with some good regulations, which is why that we at GFAJ personally support the act. But ordinarily, just an act promoting more AI development would not necessarily be the greatest thing, because this could come with just a very rushed, almost an AI arms war to just develop the best artificial intelligence without heed to the effects this could have in terms of discrimination and user privacy. But this act does juxtapose it with some very good regulations, so that's why it is a very good act to support. So these are just some of the major players in terms of the most promising bills for regulating artificial intelligence. So the Social Media Nudge Act isn't directly tied to AI, but does have implications because those algorithms used to generate content, just generate the order of content that users view, and just other aspects of the Nudge Act are very much tied to artificial intelligence. So these are the four major player acts in terms of what I'm personally prioritizing and what GFAJ is prioritizing in terms of what we advocate for. There are definitely a ton of other acts in the works that were proposed or just currently being developed that surround artificial intelligence, but these are some of the ones that I personally think are the most promising. So these are congressional links. I don't believe I can copy the link when it's in presentation mode, but I will send those in the chat later on if you guys are interested. So the congressional bill summaries are essentially just what the federal government puts out surrounding these bills. So I've personally found that this is the most reliable source to get information about these bills because it includes who proposed it, when it was initiated, what state it is, like was it initiated, is it in committee, was it voted on, that kind of thing. And then just text for the bill and an overview of the bill. So it's very useful information. So that's one of the most reliable places to get information about these laws. All right, so that's about it. So I'm just going to hop back to the activity on a elevator pitch, and then we'll wrap up the fellowship day one after this. All right, so if you guys are ready and able to share your pitch, feel free to unmute or just paste it in the chat. Or if you need more time, let me know.
I can go first if that's okay. So my name is Prisha Gupchandani, and I'm a student at NBTHS, and I reside in NJ Legislative District 17. I'd like to thank you for meeting with me today to talk about the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act. As you know, facial recognition technology is increasingly being used in law enforcement, including in equipping drones or police body cameras with facial analysis software for lethal operations that can severely injure and harm innocent people. There are numerous studies showing that FRT regularly misidentifies people of color. Such software can often not detect dark-skinned people, as the systems are trained on images of predominantly light-skinned men. The technology itself is racist, as it is disproportionately leveraged against communities of color and can often result in catastrophic consequences for innocent citizens. The underrepresentation of minority groups in the data that shapes AI has led to the creation of technology that is optimized for a small portion of this world. Due to the inherent bias present in FRT, I urge you to support this act. By doing so, you can prevent the further use of facial recognition and other biometric tech that poses a significant privacy and civil liberty issue and disproportionately harms marginalized communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Appreciate that was amazing. That did a really good job talking about just why you relate to it and why it's important. And that was just an awesome pitch overall, very effective. Does anyone else want to share? All right, all good, no worries. It might be kind of uncomfortable just talking about this on the spot. Yeah, thank you again, Prisha, that was awesome. So I am going to wrap up the fellowship soon, so I'm going to keep you guys for a few more minutes, but if you guys are able to unmute and just share takeaways from day one of the fellowship, so that was just very much focused on the basics of AI ethics and then some specific advocacy tips. And then tomorrow we'll go into more like the mechanisms of artificial intelligence and the intersection of it with different world issues. So yeah, any thoughts on fellowship day one? And you guys can unmute or put that in chat. And yeah, feel free to share what you learned, any connections you've made, that kind of thing.
So my biggest takeaway, I thought it was really, really interesting about like the lobbying aspect. I really thought it was interesting and how like anybody could really do it if you're like prepared enough. And I just thought it was really interesting to hear about like how to lobby and like what to expect, and even hearing about like what your lobbying session looked like. And yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Lobbying is definitely something that anyone can do. Like it seems very intimidating, but it's for sure something that you guys can all do, just meeting with your legislators and talking about it. All right, if no one has any other takeaways, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna have you, oh, let me just stop the recording.